Thank you all for coming to this Sunday forum. I was not here last week, but I know what you did last week here in church. Hey, I think I did. And if you followed the lectionary, you heard the words of the prophet Amos. The prophet Amos, who in chapter 8 said, "Hear this, you who trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over that we may sell grain and the Sabbath be ended that we may market wheat, skimping on the measure, boosting the price and cheating with dishonest scales, buying the poor with silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, selling even the sweepings with the wheat. The Lord has sworn by himself, the pride of Jacob, I will never forget anything that they have done. Will not the land tremble for this, and all who live in it mourn? The whole land will rise like the Nile, it will be stirred up and then sink like the river of Egypt." You know, the people who designed the lectionary could not have come up with a more propitious time to have us hear those words. Or for that matter, the gospel readings that we've been exploring for the last couple of weeks in the Gospel of Luke. As you know, in both of those gospel readings, Jesus has been talking about our relationship to wealth. And in particular this week, you will hear a gospel reading that will talk about the relationship between the haves and have-nots. Now, we all know what's in the headlines today. The federal government is about to be closed down over a fight that is on the surface about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. But it's also fundamentally about all of our obligations to those of us who are struggling at the lower rungs of the economy. The fact that this is the larger subtext, to me, is brought home by a vote that happened earlier this week, or actually earlier this month, over the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what's known as food stamps. The legislation, among other things, will cut $40 billion out of that program over 10 years, impose limits on how long people can receive benefits. The Center for Budget and Policy Priorities estimates that 3.8 million people will lose benefits if these cuts go into effect. And the benefits, by the way, amount to only about $1.40 a meal, starting October 1st. Now, some of the people who have voted for that cut are people of faith, and they're people who believe that they have a biblical mandate to do this. After all, they say, wasn't it Paul in 2 Thessalonians who said, the one who is unwilling to work shall not eat? But surely there is no... They quoted? But surely there is no biblical mandate for the spirit of self-centeredness or of selfishness or of greed that lies at the heart of the economic policy debate that we're having right now. Think about this. We're about to send our national economy and perhaps the global economy over the edge on behalf of people who are unwilling to use the wealth that we have and the institution of government that we've created as a means to ensure that all people in this community that we call America have the basics of life, of health, and of well-being. We're having an argument over how much we can hold back for ourselves rather than an argument over how much we ought to be sharing. Now, I believe that this is an opportunity for the church to echo the words of Amos, to say to a nation that says that it wants to live out Christian values in its civic life, that God is not pleased with a society in which the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. That God is not pleased with a society in which millions of people are having their labor stolen from them. That God is not pleased that we have people who are skimping on the measure and cheating with dishonest scales and getting away with it. And certainly God is not pleased with a society or with a church that preaches a gospel of prosperity, but supports a politics of economic oppression. So I'm preaching to the choir when I say all that. I know most of you agree with me. But I think we need to up our game. And the economic crisis that we're facing in this country is not just simply a policy argument, but it is indicative of a spiritual crisis. And the spiritual crisis demands a spiritual response. And that's what I want to talk about. We already walk the walk in a lot of ways. We have the Loaves and Fishes program. We house all kinds of ministries that reach out to low-income people who are poor and to the economically struggling, economically oppressed. Each of you as individuals, many of you as individuals have life callings that involve you being on the front lines of all of this. Still, I think we have to ask ourselves, how can we be a more effective prophetic voice at this particular time of economic crisis and spiritual crisis? So that's why I brought Greg Kaufmann here, who is the writer of the This Week in Poverty column at The Nation magazine. He is also, his work appears on billboards.com. His work also appears in a number of print outlets. He's been a guest on a number of news shows. You may have seen him, in fact. And I've asked him to share what he's been doing what he's been writing about, and particularly how that relates to the people of faith that he has talked to as he's been chronicling the unfolding of all of this. He's a graduate of Dickinson College. He studied creative writing at Miami University in Ohio. He has been an advisor to the Barbara Ehrenreich Economic Hardship Reporting Project. His hometown of Washington, D.C., which is for me a big plus. And he also has a wonderful sense of humor. I am not going to share with you the emails that we exchanged last night, but take it for granted that he has a wonderful sense of humor. He has a wife, a son, and 2 daughters, and I'm going to turn it over to Rick.
Well, thanks, Isaiah, and thank you all for inviting me to be with you this morning. And I just got to first say, when Isaiah offered the opening prayer, is that what you would call it, an opening prayer? An opening prayer. When I think about what's needed right now to address poverty, which is, we can go over sort of how extensive poverty is in this country, but one thing we don't talk about enough is the character of the conversation. So we've got here in DC such venom and vitriol of both sides that disagree. My allies too getting caught up in a tone of hate, whether it's actually hate, I don't know, but a tone of hate. Whereas you hear a prayer like that, the power of faith and love and kindness and what are our moral and spiritual obligations. That's a message I really think personally needs to be heard right now. Because I think ultimately to get where we all want to go, I think it's not going to be through the venom and the vitriol. It's going to be through the power of our ideas, and it's going to be through standing together with other righteous people. And I don't always do this in my writing, by the way. I mean, I get caught up in the fight, and it's hard not to. When you see a food stamp cut of $40 billion and 4 million people being tossed off the aid that they literally need to not go hungry. You'll hear some some Republicans, mostly Republicans, say, well, but not just Republicans, but mostly say, well, we don't have starvation, real starvation. Well, that's because we have this food stamp program. I mean, when Peter Edelman and the late Senator Bobby Kennedy went down to Mississippi in the late 60s, they saw bloated bellies and open sores on children because we didn't have a rigorous, we had a limited food stamp program.
It was that way. I was there in the 1960s for OEO. It was one of my states.
Yeah.
It was a terrible situation.
Yeah, and so we obviously can't go backwards. And so when Isaiah says, you know, what can the faith community do? The first thing that comes to my mind is, you know, help teach people what it means to act out of love and kindness, even in the heat of the battle. But quickly, and probably many or even all of you know sort of some of the numbers. I mean, we're talking about, so poverty, the official poverty line is about a little over $23,000 for a family of 4, a little over $18,000 for a family of 3 annually. And there are 46.5 million people living below that line. If you go down to even just half the poverty line, so about $12,000 for a family of 4, 20.5 million people. 1 in 15 Americans, 15 million women and children. It's up 60% since 2000. We've got an increase in people who are very desperately poor. And one number that I think we need to keep in mind as Americans, as people of faith, to really get a sense of how much people are struggling. To me, and the important number is how we, because I don't want to talk long, I really want to have a conversation, but if you look at people who are living on less than twice the poverty line, so you're talking about less than about $36,000 for a family of 3. Now that might not be poverty, but it certainly means you're struggling for the basics, for food, healthcare, housing. That's over 1 in 3 Americans, 106 million people. So I think whether you call it poverty or struggling desperately, and those people are one hardship away, by the way, of falling into poverty. A lost job, a prolonged family illness, a foreclosure, you know, rent's going on. I mean, that it's hard to be able to even afford another property. So, you know, Isaiah was talking about how we respond as a faith community. I'm Jewish, and we just had Yom Kippur, of course, and the prophet Isaiah actually was our reading for one of our main readings, and he was basically saying, you know, you think it's enough just to not have food and water for a day. That's not what it's about. It's about using this energy, turning inward to get forgiveness, and in order to then turn outward, feed the hungry. I mean, he says that, house the homeless. You know, then what does he say? Then you'll be like a well-watered garden, a spring whose waters will never fail. So we turn inward, we seek forgiveness from those we've wronged, we seek forgiveness from God through prayer, teshuva we call it, and then we go outward into the community to try to heal these things. And so how are we responding? Isaiah mentioned the cuts in food stamps. I mean, cash assistance in 1996 for every 100 families living in poverty, below the poverty line, 68 were able to receive cash assistance. Not great, but not terrible. Now, 27 for every 100 families. We've made it harder for people to get cash assistance. Housing, with the sequester, by early 2014, an estimated 140,000 families, fewer families, are going to have Section 8 housing. Now, right now, only 1 in 4 families eligible for housing assistance receive it. So we're going backwards, and that's only the 3rd time in 30 years. So this has been another, like food stamps have always been bipartisan, mostly. Housing assistance too, Section 8, fairly bipartisan. This is the 2nd or 3rd time since the program was created under Nixon, I believe.
The last real Democrat.
Right. Created it in the sense that it was on the books to be created.
Sorry?
He did not himself personally have anything
Right.
to do with it. It was already there. It's just like the Environmental Protection Act, which he brought into existence and funded. It was already brought into existence, actually.
Right. Right, true, but he would never have been able to secure the Republican nomination today, though, that's for sure. But so it's only like the third time since the program was created that we're not going to at least renew housing assistance for the people who already have it. Okay, and we're talking about families that make on average, less than $12,500 annually. So you look at food, you look at housing, you look at cash assistance, you look at what's happening with healthcare. We're not responding, and we're not. I think people of faith. Isaiah asked what I'm hearing and talking to people of faith. I think people of faith are doing our best to respond. But I'll tell you what we're up against. I was at a hearing. Congressman Paul Ryan had a hearing a couple weeks ago called. It was basically he was saying he's going to assess how the war on poverty is going, and Sister Simone Campbell was the Democratic witness, and one of the Republican congressmen, also from was he from Wisconsin? It wasn't Ryan, but anyway, he said to Sister Simone, you know, I'm a person of deep faith. My two brothers are ministers. One of my sons is a minister. And someone else, and Sister Simone was like, "Whoa!" And she said that, it was kind of funny. But he said, "You know, Sister, what is the church doing wrong? You know, that because our message is one of taking care of love and taking care of people who are struggling. What is the church doing wrong that it has to come to the government for so much money?" Yeah, so that's to Isaiah's point. People of faith who oppose the programs that we feel help and are needed. That's their frame. And she pointed out, look, Congressman, all due respect, this is an issue of scale. There's a Bread for the World study that showed when the Republicans had wanted to cut just $20 billion, not just, it's a lot, but half of what they're proposing now, every house of worship, every church, synagogue, mosque would have had to raise $50,000 extra every year for 10 years just to make up for the food stamp cut. That's not talking about housing or health care or child care or any of the other cuts. So I don't know, and that's where, at least as a writer, I can get caught up in what I'm saying we might need less of just getting so angry. And I'm not saying we don't call those things out. We do, and we speak to what we perceive as the truth and our responsibility. And also, by the way, we have a lot of brilliant people in this town who've studied these programs for a long time. And not only can they make moral arguments that we all share, but they can show, for example, that adults who received food stamp program in the late 60s and early 70s compared to those who didn't, what their better health outcomes are, what their better economic work productivity outcomes are. Almost all the major programs, you can find people who have by now had a chance to follow people from childhood to adulthood, to show what a modest investment can do to help people and to actually save money in the long term compared to what we spend, what we might end up spending in the social. So people might have less reliance on the safety net by getting food stamps as children, or a little cash assistance, because it makes sense. Because then, their parents can not work 3 jobs, maybe just work 2 jobs or 1 job. They are healthy in school. They're not hungry. They can focus. There's all kinds of things that make sense, and we have the data to back it up. So I'm going to wrap up and then turn it into we can just talk. But I think the main thing for people of faith is to keep fighting the fight you're doing. You're in the communities, so you know the people. We don't hear the people who are struggling. We don't hear from them enough in this town. We hear from policy experts. Isaiah said, I get on interviews and I'm thinking, why you need to talk to people who are experiencing. I'll say it. You need to talk to people who are experiencing this. So I think the more we can elevate those voices as a faith community, and also I think there is a leadership role in how we have this debate. what reflects well on our values, the tone, rhetoric, and that sort of thing.